thank you for joining us today. This is the latest in the ibex series on utility customer engagement. Today, we're talking about the nexus of content and e-commerce for the modern utility customer experience. And thankfully, we have two extraordinary experts who are here to share their experience and insights with us today. Please join me in welcoming Felicia Childs, Director of Marketing at FirstEnergy. Felicia is responsible for the utility's flagship new marketplace, FirstEnergyHome.com. Felicia spent some time at some amazing brands, including American Express and AOL, and brings more than 25 years experience with consumer brands to her role at FirstEnergy. Felicia is working to accelerate their cross-channel approach to achieving great customer outcomes at the FirstEnergyHome.com marketplace. And join me in welcoming Bethany Farchione. She's the Director of Marketing at Questline, the leading company for content management and marketing, specializing in building long-term relationships between utilities and their customers through content and new media. Bethany is responsible for bringing new content strategy to the industry and enjoys finding new ways to help utilities broaden their digital outreach. This is my second webinar with Bethany this year, and I always enjoy her insights and learn a lot. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, happy to be here.
And as always, we like to start with a poll. So give me just a moment. And we want to collect a little bit of information from our audience today and thank everybody for joining us. We've got a brief poll to learn a little bit more about your utility, and it'll help us shape some of our conversation today. So please tell us where your utility ranks in your digital customer journey. We have a few questions and responses there, so please check all that apply. And we'll give everybody just a couple of minutes. And it's very helpful to give our panelists some insight so that we can shape some of our responses. And we'll wrap that up and I'll share the results. So we've got a little bit of a mix of maturity and newness to the customer journey for our attendees. I'm very happy to hear that about 60% of our audience has some form of e-commerce offering. A little surprised that not more utilities that are attending have more of that digital start and stop on their sites. But it does look like this is it's going to end up being a pretty good topic for us because we've got folks that are just probably starting working with new media and new content on their sites. So appreciate you guys joining and giving us that feedback. All right, and with that, I think we should jump right in. So as utilities continue to make investments in content innovation, new marketplaces, and other properties, I'd like to open it up to the panel and ask, what do you see as the value of content to utility customer engagement? And why do you think it's so important to the success of utility marketplaces?
I'll take a stab at that first. I think that content's really important because it helps build trust and it answers questions that customers may have along the way. It can be used to educate and persuade without people feeling like they're being sold to. And we know that 70% of internet users prefer to learn about new products and services through content versus advertisements. So using content to not only engage, but to organically sell is a really powerful practice right now.
Yeah, I think just to build on what Bethany said, I think that's an excellent point. You know, I think from our perspective, we're thinking about our customers in a new way, and we're using commerce as a way to start to engage with them in a different way. And I think it's important to appreciate that while we know them as customers, we don't necessarily know them as consumers. And what we're asking for is permission actually to talk to them in a different way and to engage with them differently. And Bethany's absolutely right. You know, what's great about the utilities is that we start with a basis of trust, and even more so than big tech in a lot of ways. And all content does in that case is starts to reinforce that trust. It starts to help our customer base, inform them about the products and services that we're offering for them, give them a lot more confidence in making some of those decisions backed by someone they already have a lot of trust with. So content just adds a lot of credibility to us as we start to engage and start to talk to our customers in a very different way.
A really great point, and especially as we think in terms of now we've got different kinds of customers with different needs, and content's exploded in its variety to be able to connect the dots and really find something that works for virtually everybody that the utility has to service. Well, I appreciate those insights. Let's talk for a minute about maybe some of the common pitfalls. I know we have some practitioners in our audience And we've all seen it, right? However good the intention, sometimes digital outreach can fall flat. We see it, from maybe it's just not timely or relevant or personalized. What are some of the challenges you've seen in your career, and how can you help our audience maybe improve their results or their chance for success?
I think you could even have the best email, the best piece of content. It's filled with really helpful videos, great messaging. But if it's sent to the wrong group of people or the wrong audience, that then makes it unsuccessful. One thing that comes to mind is pool pumps. They're great. They're a large sale item in a marketplace. But if you think about it, there's a very small portion of your customer base that actually has pools. And so when you send it potentially to a group of people that doesn't own it, it falls on deaf ears and it becomes unsuccessful content, even if it was put together with great video, great articles, great content. Audience really matters.
Sure. Maybe just to add to that, Mark, you talked about personalization. I think, personalization becomes really critically important because, as we start to engage customers differently, they feel like we know them, like they feel known to us already. And personalization just helps reinforce that we know who you are. And so in extending that relationship with them, it's really important to remind them that we know who they are. And I think sometimes as a utility, we get a little tangled up in regulation and content in data that we can use and customer information that we can't use. But in fact, there's a lot of information that we already know about customers. We know where they live, we know their name. So there's a lot of things that we're starting to kind of think about and start to put in place where we can localize the content, especially in an email. If you haven't had a relationship with Movable Ink, they'll blow your mind in terms of how much they can personalize and localize the content that you're sending out. But there's a lot that we know. And then there's a lot of really simple things that you can do also that start to give permission to your customers to get to know them a little bit better. Polls are a fantastic way to do that. It's super engaging. Listen, we're all humans and we all kind of like to talk about ourselves. And so polls end up being one of the most engaging pieces of content that you send out. But you could ask very, very simple questions about what different kinds of content that your audience is interested in. You have to make sure that you can pay off on that once you ask that kind of a question. But I think it's a really great way to start to get to know them, start to understand what kind of content they want to receive, and then make sure that you continue to use any kind of level of personalization that you know and that you're allowed to use. It's fairly simple to put somebody's name if they've purchased from you in their email. Sounds really simple, but you'd be surprised how much it doesn't happen. And it's a good way. People want to feel known by the organizations that they do business with.
You make a great point, and it's really startling for utilities sometimes to have, I think, have permission from their customers to engage that way, because historically, it's not an industry that has necessarily doubled down or leaned in on personalization, but every other brand that is doing any form of e-commerce has tuned it to such a high degree that utilities really do. And I mean, they have permission to really engage customers, that customers expect that level of personalization and really demand it. Appreciate those insights.
Sure.
So very good, useful tips. I know we've talked about the big themes. I'd like to get into a little bit more of your programmatic thoughts here, because I know we have some great visuals to share and some interesting insights. And our audience has a skew towards the practitioners. So I'd like to start talking about some of the insights you can share to help our audience amplify the effectiveness of their content and marketplace programs and really accelerate their approach. So Bethany, could we start with you?
Sure. One of my favorite things about content is that it can be used in every part of the buyer's journey. So there's endless opportunity to use different various types of content. So there's articles, videos, infographics, interactive content. It each has a spot, and it can help with awareness, consideration, all of that. And it depends where you place it and how you get it in front of your customers. So the example on the screen is an actual marketplace page, and there's content right directly within that listing that helps people understand what they're buying and why they might need it. It's answering questions along the way. Yeah, you can go ahead to the next one. I think one of the best things about content, and especially when it goes to marketplaces, is that you can discover what holes in information your customers might have and then act as that trusted resource to help guide them of where they should go. So common questions like the example on the screen of what's the difference between programmable and smart thermostats. If you can share that on platforms like social media, that becomes an awareness tool. But when you build it directly into your marketplace, it becomes a facilitator for actual sales. It helps people figure out what they need when they're at that trigger point for buying. And I think the next slide has an example of that. Yeah, so when you can build your content directly into your marketplace listings, it helps guide your customer through all of the choices that they're making when they're on this page. And it just really helps them have the best possible customer experience. We're also seeing that interactive content is hugely relevant right now. People like to have entertainment with education. So if you go to the next example, I have an infographic that shows people where smart technology can fit into their daily life. So if you can see those circles around the images in the infographic, you can actually click on them when you're in this live example, and it can explain to you where in your life you can save energy in that part of your home. And you can link to specific programs, specific marketplace listings. Going even a step further, if you go to the next slide, and my last slide is an example of a completely interactive environment where you can create content that creates a full experience. So there's the option of having content on social media and the content within emails to help educate, but then there are these whole content environments if you want to bring it to the next level, where say someone clicks on the prompt to learn about the dishwasher, they can then on the side see where they can actually buy one that fits their energy needs and enroll in programs that are relevant to them and their utilities. So content has a continuum of simplistic to fully complex, and that's the best part, I think, is you figure out what your customers need and then you build that journey with them along the way.
Thanks very much. I love the examples. We always get great examples from Questline, but the interactivity that can stimulate folks to spend a little bit more time on the page and making that content part of the e-commerce experience and making it easy to find the products and services that the customer may be prompted to investigate. That's really one of the benefits of being more fully digital and blending these approaches. Felicia, I know you have a lot of thoughts in this area. I'll turn it over to you.
I do. I think, it's great. Bethany showed a lot of really great content out there. And I think it's interesting to look across all of those different examples and see how wildly different all of those things are. Some of them are highly interactive and very immersive. Some of them are highly informational. What I think is important, and full disclosure to our audience, we agreed I would go second because I was going to talk about measurement, and and it's not exactly the most exciting part of it, but it's super important because as much as content isn't necessarily a paid channel, it still needs to be measured. And you still need to understand it because it's still a heavy lift either from your teams or if you're working with great partners like at Questline in order to acquire some of that information. It becomes really important to understand what is working and what isn't. So Mark, if you want to go ahead and show some of my slides, they're not nearly as fun as Bethany's, I'm sorry. But what you're seeing here this is not my data. This isn't anybody's data. This is data these are dashboards that are available on Tableau Public. And oftentimes it sounds maybe a little bit silly to go shopping in someplace like a Tableau Public, but to go and look at it and start to get a little bit of inspiration around how are other businesses measuring, how are they grouping channels together, how are they thinking about how to measure and how to inform their business. And it's a good place to get some inspiration, at least start to understand where you want to go. For content in particular, it's fairly common to start with engagement as one of the KPIs that you think is really important to you. But it is important for you to be really clear about what that KPI is. What are those KPIs that you agree makes it successful? I think as marketers, most of us empirically understand that we feel like if we've driven greater engagement, we're eventually going to drive revenue, we're eventually going to drive some sort of a conversion or some sort of an action. But getting insights essentially into one place and being able to assess how that content is performing across a variety of different engagements and a variety of different types is work. And it's difficult. So, in some of these examples, even on this dashboard here, a like and a share in one channel versus a video view and a completion in another versus SEO versus time on page are all engagement metrics, but they're all wildly different. And so not having them all consolidated in one place, and in some cases having to normalize some of that data, you're going to drown in information. You won't be able to look across different channels and see, is what we're doing working? Is it working across the board? Is it working better in one channel versus another? And then if you start to get, really nutty, you can start to actually also start to tag different kinds of content. So some of what Bethany showed, we have some things that are highly engaging. We have some things that are a little bit more informational. If for you to use like micro influencers, like that's something that you definitely want to start to understand. And are those driving better engagements? But in bringing it all in one place, you're not drowning in data, you're actually starting to see insights. So it's a heavy lift. I won't lie about it. It's hard, but it's critically important. So we have some examples in here about, these are just generic businesses, but they all are pretty good examples of how organizations are bringing data into one place so that they can start to assess performance across a variety of different channels. And content is no different. And content is something that is worthy of investing that kind of time in, because if you're writing it yourself or you're partnering with somebody, it's still a heavy lift for your organization. And it's really important to start to demonstrate to your organization the value of it and that it is showing better engagement and better relationship with your customers. So again, these are all examples. All of these are out there for you. It sounds like a silly thing to shop for, but go ahead and peruse Tableau Public, because what you have out there are a lot of people who are hugely talented that are posting things that they feel like look really great and do a great job visualizing actually what you're trying to measure.
I can really appreciate the hurdle that data and information presents, because when we're talking about, maybe large scale e-commerce enterprises, they're assimilating tons of data. But if you're just starting in these programs, I think finding the right KPI, and you really spoke to it perfectly, finding the right KPI is so critical. If you just jump to the end and you don't really understand the ways in which your customers want to interact, and you don't find ways of measuring early in the funnel and early in the customer journey, we're just not going to get to the revenue outcomes. So we're putting the cart before the horse a little bit there. And it can be really intimidating to just get awash in data. Felicia, I would like to double down on one more thing, because historically content, and I think to the old days of newsletters or, suggestions around energy use or just amplifying known experiences, it was really about energy efficiency and education. But your team has started to really innovate around linking content to e-commerce so that customers can actually achieve their results, right? More activate customer engagement, customer decision making. And I wanted to just get your thoughts on that, and I'll share the slide in just a second.
Yeah, so I think what you're getting at, I think, is very critically important. And where we start to lean in with our customers is around the smart home space, around products and services that we think will make their homes run better, and services that we think will provide them a certain level of protection. What we're seeing here are some ways to use content to start to anticipate some of those customer issues. So you may buy a Nest, learning thermostat, and we all think we're really great, and of course we can install it ourselves. But you may get that home and discover that you have a 50-year-old house and that your wiring looks wildly different than it does on the back of the package. And so anticipating where we think some of those customer dissatisfiers are and getting out in front of them, where we can very gently send an email afterwards with potentially some videos to help you and with your installation, and or very gently suggest that we actually offer installation services and now might be a great time to call us. Is just a way to start to make sure that that transaction lands well and that customer is satisfied. And content, is the way to start to, bridge that gap and start to help them understand that. So going beyond, oh, these things work together. So going beyond just that, dropping them after that sale is final. So making sure that we're getting out in front of customer service calls and that we're providing them with that just additional handoff so that they can be really successful in having these things in their home.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the content really finds its way into new channels of engaging customers, especially like what you talked about in terms of even that post-transaction. Customers may have purchased it without the professional installation, but now customer care and follow-up emails can re-engage that customer in case we don't have insight that the customer's actually installed that product. I've returned two myself because it scares me to take my thermostat off the wall. So I love that you're offering those additional services. I can see we have a couple of questions from the audience, and I will throw this out to the group. So what is, in your opinion, what is the key in creating successful partnerships to amplify digital customer experience efforts for a sector like utilities that historically has been a DIY or a build it themselves approach? Felicia, why don't you start?
Yeah. I'll start. I mean, because, Bethany and her team are one of my partners, and they do a great job of providing us with content because, as a utility, we don't necessarily have enough, resources to necessarily develop everything on our own. And I think you shouldn't expect that you should. It's critically important. You may have some things that you want to develop on your own, some things that you want very custom to your situation or your customer base, but there's a lot of really great content out there that you can start to curate and start to aggregate, and having the right partner is really important. But I think in having that conversation, and this is true of virtually any partnership, is being really clear about what you're trying to achieve and what your goals are and what you're being measured on. And then that way, as you start to integrate some of that content, you can say, well, this is working and this is not. But ultimately, just having a very clear vision of what you're trying to achieve, right? So we've talked about a variety of different things here, everything from, blog content to follow-up emails. I think understanding how you want to prioritize that communication, I think is really important, because then, someone like, Bethany and her team can come to the table with a recommendation of what they have and what they can help with.
I'll add to that in the sense that we've talked about a ton of different ways to weave in content, a ton of different formats, and it probably feels overwhelming. I saw that a few people shared in the survey that they're not posting regularly on social media. That's just not part of their strategy right now. And I think that's where partners come into place, where they can help you determine, is social worth it, or where should you be investing your time? Should it be email? Is that probably where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck or your return? And you don't have to do this all by yourself. So it's really overwhelming to think of, all right, I need to build a platform. I need to have a piece of content for every stage. While there's tons of opportunity and that's exciting, it can be a roadblock to get started if you feel like you need to take that all on yourself. And luckily, there are so many partners. So Questline being one that can actually create content and help people build strategies. Ibex has marketplace platforms. And then Felicia, you mentioned an email partner earlier that helps with personalization. There are just solutions out there for really anything that you want to do, and they're much more affordable than they ever have been in the past, which is great, which means we can all experiment and do a little bit more than we have previously.
That's a great point, Bethany, and I hadn't considered it before, but 5 and 8, 10 years ago, as utilities started to make some investments in marketplaces, for example, a lot of it was very DIY. It was on legacy technology. Procurement drove the process. But in the intervening just relatively short few years, there's been a massive influx of vendors to the marketplace and solution providers to the marketplace that deliver as a service, can deliver incrementally so that utilities can scale. There's not really a need to build these big monolithic structures anymore, which may be playing against muscle memory, but that's I think a great point that doesn't get talked about enough. There are partners that make things more affordable, more efficient, and easier because you don't really have to do it yourself. And just to double down on the social point, and I know this is sort of off topic or But I took the note at our poll that really no one's doing too much with social media. It does still feel a little bit like the Wild West. And Felicia, not to put you too much on the spot with an impromptu question, but I know you have experience with social from your other consumer brand experience. How important is social, do you think, going into the next few years for utilities to try and embrace?
I actually think social is wildly important, but you also have to be, show yourself a little bit of grace. It is something that you have to grow over time. We touched a little bit on micro influencers and this and that. So finding the right social partner, I think, is great. And Bethany's right. So you talk very strategically, and then let those people help you understand from a content perspective what you want to use to engage with your customers. But I also think we're talking about products and services that you don't necessarily buy every day. So a lot of what we're using content for, and what social media does in a really great way, is to keep those people engaged, stay engaged with your customer in between those purchases. Because you don't buy a light bulb every day, you don't buy these services all the time. But what we want is that we want those customers to stay engaged with us all the time, and social media is a really great way to do it. And there's a lot of really light lift things that you can do, right? So if you start developing content in one channel, it's really easy to chop it down and to use it in social media, and potentially even use it multiple times if you make sure there's a lot of separation between it. As much as like we like to believe that everything we put out there, everybody reads, like they kind of don't. So, it's okay to go ahead and post things maybe a couple of times, as long as you're giving it, some breathing room. But I think it's important to start to set that expectation with your customer base about how often you're going to be communicating with them, what kinds of things you're going to be communicating with them on, and keeping them involved with you over a period of time, so that when you do want to sell them something, like, you're still kind of top of mind.
Yeah, it's humbling to think, to get the results sometimes of how broadly or not our content gets out there, but we do have to keep it
Yeah.
out. And for the exact point you made, that we want to stay top of mind for our customers. Okay, well, this one I will throw to Bethany first. Another question from our audience. How does customer segmentation influence or guide content in e-commerce for utilities from your perspective?
I think that segmentation can fall either at the beginning or the end of a strategy. I love it in the beginning because it can guide what type of content you create. So you might find that you have people who've already put a smart thermostat in your home. Well, what's their next step? What's the information that those particular people need to continue moving forward with their energy efficiency journey? And then there's the people who have not even considered a smart thermostat. So how do you build content that answers very basic questions? And how do you cover that whole range of early adopter to haven't even considered? And I think people really appreciate, and Felicia, you said it earlier, of being known. So if you've already bought a smart thermostat, it doesn't feel good to receive a promotion for the same product that you might have bought a month or two ago. So paying attention to those things, and building content and promotions that match where people are in their own particular journey, I think is really important. If you're sending them irrelevant things, they may begin to tune you out, which is a scary thought, that someone may not be paying attention to the messages you're sending them. And the best way to combat that is to be relevant with segmentation.
Alicia, same question. How have you seen customer segmentation really influence your approach to content, and also tying it together with e-commerce?
It's interesting. We think about it on a variety of different levels, both from a customer, who is in different kinds of segments, if they purchased from us before. I think customer segmentation changes, and Bethany touched on this as well. It changes as your life cycle matures, right? So you can be much more highly segmented when you know a lot about your customer base and you have a very really significant customer base. Early on, it may be something as simple as bought from us or didn't buy from us, and that's okay. It's okay to start there, and it's okay to think about that differently. I think the other way to start to segment is around your product sets. So we offer a variety of different kinds of products. Some of them are durable goods that are tangible goods that customers are fairly familiar with, right? Like the Nest thermostat, Google does a fantastic job advertising that for us. All I have to do is tell you how to buy it from me and what it works with and why you might need it. Versus when we start thinking about something like a service, that is something that is going to take multiple touch points. And we want to think about how to take somebody along that journey. So you may first want to understand what that product is and why you need it, and then why you need it from us. That's, that is something, that is messaging that needs to be sequenced. And that's a totally different customer journey than somebody who comes to our site and already pretty much understands what a product is. So segmenting your content and also segmenting your customer base around, different journeys that, some things that are more considered versus things that are less considered, is also a really easy way to start to think about segmentation, especially if you're really early on and you don't necessarily have a big customer base to start to, nuance and to, really start to, fracture, if you will, your content among all of these different segments.
Thanks for that insight. I appreciate the way both of you talk about it in terms of that you don't need to be a perfect expert, and you shouldn't expect to right off the bat. That it's really a matter of, use the available information, make some estimates, and consider some customer journeys, and stay focused on the customer, and that segmentation models can mature just as much as your e-commerce approach can. That's not something that gets discussed too often. In fact, the consulting world seems to throw a lot of weight behind, highly detailed segmentation models that utilities are supposed to consume, but not necessarily give themselves the break to try some things and to start with a small approach. I think that's very refreshing to hear. Well, I appreciate the answers to our customers or our attendees' questions. Now we're going to shift to some famous last words. So it's usually at the end of the webinars where I ask our panelists for some pithy last words about what they most look forward to in the post-COVID world, in terms of getting back to the office or returning to some travel. But now that we're all starting to do those things, I thought we could use a few minutes to talk about some future trends that are relevant to the industry and especially around segmentation and customer personas. Felicia and Bethany both have expertise and insights about two particular trends that are sure to affect the utility industry and our customers, and I wanted to get some quick thoughts. So first, to Bethany. Give me a moment. Can't find all of the buttons. So Bethany, I know you and your team think a lot about the EV market and EV buyers in particular, and I'm a total gearhead, so I have some bias here. But I wanted to get your thoughts on what you see as an opportunity for utilities with this customer segment.
Sure. We're seeing with our clients that we've been pushing EV messages for a really long time. Like we've been doing EV 101 and then building programs for people who bought their battery in their car, and they're pros at this. They're really passionate about it. But with what's going on with legislation and whatnot around EVs, they are more popular to more people than they have been before. So we've noticed that it feels kind of exhaustive from our standpoint. Like maybe we've talked about EVs for years. Like, do we really need to talk about the basics again? Well, there's a whole new wave of people who are finally paying attention to electric vehicles who hadn't before, because they see now that it's mainstream. It's no longer a small subset. It's going to be everywhere soon. And so we're reusing some of our older content that was at that 101 level. And that's another point about content, is that you don't always have to create new stuff. You can reuse things along the way and get the most out of it. And we're seeing a lot of potential there with EVs in particular.
Yeah, I read everything that you and Brian put out, that Questline puts out on EVs. I'm not yet a buyer, but I'm starting to be a shopper. So you've got one convert at least.
Good.
Felicia, I'd like to get your thoughts, because I know that this is something that it's a growing population for utility customers, this concept of customers who are aging in place. And I know you and FirstEnergy Home are innovating around this. So wanted to get your thoughts.
Yeah, we're definitely looking at, it's interesting. We're looking at a lot of trends that have started to emerge around the home post-pandemic. So how people are interacting with their homes, how they're utilizing that space differently has has offered a lot of different kinds of opportunities. There's obviously, some hygienic issues that we think are starting to kind of emerge in terms of a very interesting trend. But this idea around health and wellness and aging in place was already started, I would say, pre-pandemic, that I would say has gasoline on it. That, either for yourself or for a loved one, most people want to stay in their homes as long as they possibly can. And the great news is that the products and services right now, there's a lot of products and services that are very specific to helping people do that. But I would say smart home solutions, more generic, are helpful in terms of having eyes on somebody or having someone have eyes on you, not in a weird way, but just, to kind of check in every now and then, up to and including telehealth. Right, telehealth has come a long way, and people have become much more comfortable using telehealth. All of these things start to add to a world where you can stay at home much longer than ever before, and most people, that is their wish. As a utility, it feels like a service to our customers, right? If we can start to help provide those solutions, start to help them understand what those options are, and where they can, what they solve for and what they don't solve for, I think we can start to help people make those decisions and stay in their homes much longer, because that's ultimately what they want, even for, like I said, for yourself or for a loved one. Universally, everyone would tell you they want to stay in their home as long as possible. And so as a utility, if we could start to extend that service out and help them understand what those options are, I think it feels like, a really great way to stand in the place of our customers and really sort of, embrace what their needs are.
I appreciate that. I can't think of too many companies or brands that have the trust and credibility of the customer base to really extend. And it's also a very confusing space, right? And you can use content and an e-commerce marketplace to synthesize the information and help your customers make good decisions. I think that's a compelling future trend for us. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Especially want to extend thanks to Felicia and Bethany for your time and your terrific insights. We're always happy to host you both, and I can't imagine a better outcome. We've learned quite a lot today, and I really appreciate your time.